A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dirk van Everkoren. I'm representing the Association of Issuing Bodies here. We have the honor and the pleasure of organizing this policy event together with Energy Technologies Europe. So first and foremost, thanks to the European Commission for selecting us as official organizers of the policy event, and thanks very sincerely to Energy Technologies Europe for the very constructive cooperation in putting this event together. We will be using Slido to collect questions from the room, so during the presentations you can ask your questions using the Slido application, and then at the start of the Q&A session we will put the questions on screen and I will put them to the panelists for answering them. Please turn down your cell phones so that we don't get disturbed by loud ringtones. Thank you very much for that. How are we going to set up the event? We'll have an introduction in just 1 minute by the Commission, Henrik Daam. We're very fortunate to have the expert from the Commission as an opening speaker. Then we'll have a first panel with 3 speakers, and then a second panel with 3 speakers, and then finally we will have the Q&A session where we will answer your questions collected by Slido. Let me just finish up by saying that there is a document that I would like to pass around. We don't know who you are, so if you want to stay in touch with us, with AIB or ETE, please leave your name and your email address here on the document. I will pass this on if that's okay. And without further ado, I give the floor to Henrik Daam from the Commission for the introduction. Henrik, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dirk.
So, fill it in and pass it on.
So, thanks, Dirk. Thanks for inviting me to open this event and give an introduction. The gas sector, as we see it, is ahead of a major challenge, and that is on the decarbonization. We need to identify the necessary solutions in terms of policies, technologies, and markets. And if we are first looking at sort of the long-term perspective, we have the framework of the Paris Agreement, where by 2050, the developed country as a group should reduce its emissions by 80 to 95%. This we have reflected from the Commission side in the long-term strategy on greenhouse gas emissions from November last year, and it provides the cost-efficient pathways to greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050 in line with this Paris Agreement. This has many elements in it, but for you, it's probably more interesting to know a bit about what the considerations are for gases across the various scenarios. And there I'll just highlight one of them. In the scenarios of keeping the global warming below the 2 degrees Celsius, the use of gases will be roughly halved as compared to today if hydrogen does not develop. And this is mainly due to the lack of a consumption market. However, in the context of a large-scale end uses of hydrogen, the total consumption of gases would actually be very close to the current levels. But apart from the hydrogen, we would under all circumstances need a significant contribution from biogas. In the long-term strategy, the whole consumption of biogas would need to increase by 3 to 5-fold from today's level towards 2050, and it will mainly be used in the power and industry sectors. If we are looking more at the medium-term policies, the Commission has now delivered on the Clean Energy Package. And the Council has adopted the last elements of this package on the 12th of May this year, and for final entry into force in the mid of July. One of the main contributors in relation to that is for gases is the Renewable Energy Directive. The new Renewable Energy Directive will cover the period from 2021 to 2030, and it will provide support and framework for the development of sustainable sources of renewable gas beyond 2020 in a number of ways. So, first and foremost, we have the binding renewable energy target for 2030 of a minimum of 32%. This will obviously help renewable gas, and so will also a number of measures that are put in place for the development of all renewable energies, such as measures to improve the design and stability of support schemes and the reduction of administrative procedures. Also in that context, we have asked the member state to submit their national energy and climate plans, where they would define exactly which sectors and how to decarbonise towards 2030. And the Commission has yesterday issued its recommendations to the draft energy plans from the member states, with recommendations for each member state on how to improve towards their final energy plans that will need to be submitted by the end of the year. But coming more specifically back to the measures in the Renewable Energy Directive, another important initiative is the extension of the guarantees of origin. These are currently in place for the renewable electricity and renewable heating and cooling, but it will cover all energy carriers, including renewable gas, and this will facilitate a greater production of renewable gases, and very importantly, a clear market signal from consumers in terms of what they would like to see from renewable gas providers. Another way where the directive supports further development of renewable gases in the EU is the endeavour by member states to increase the renewable energy in heating and cooling sector by an indicative 1.3 percentage point per year during the period from 2020 to 2030. One of the possible measures that the member states can apply is to inject biomethane into the natural gas network, which will qualify as means of meeting the target. And then, very importantly, the directive provides a very strong support for the use of sustainable renewable gases in transport. Sustainable biomethane as well as renewable power to gas are included as the fuels that fuel suppliers will be able to use to meet their obligations with relation to the achievement of the minimum 14% final consumption as a binding target for renewables in the transport sector by 2030. And as part of that target, the fuel suppliers will also be able to use waste-based biomethane feedstock to meet the target of advanced renewable fuels by of 3.5% by 2030. So, in summary, from Commission perspective, we consider that there's already now, from a policy and legislative framework, that will enable the industries to start doing further investments in the area and also launching services and products to the market in the area of renewable gases. I hope that this event could cast light on some of these measures and products and investments that you will do, but also help us to identify the potential challenges that are ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrik, for your clear and very challenging opening statement. Can I ask Jorgo and James to join me on the podium? Thank you, Patrick. So first panel we have put before you. First of all, I'm going to pass the floor immediately to Jorgo Chatzimarkakis. He is the Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe, and he will be the first to pick up the challenge that was presented by Henrik to the industry. How are you going to work within this new legal and political framework for renewable gases? Jorgo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And out of solidarity with my friend James, who had an unprecedented shower, I took off my jacket as well. So, yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for giving Hydrogen Europe the possibility to present our view on this, this disruption that we all live. Hydrogen Europe is the leading association when it comes to hydrogen technologies and systems in Europe. Here you see the logos of our members. It has become quite a lot. It's about 200 from small and big industry, but also from national associations and from research institutions. Renewable shares, that's what we all want. We want more renewable shares in our different systems and sectors. And we have performed quite well in the power sector, as we can see here, because of some regulatory instruments, because of some legislation. We have had a hard time to translate this in heat and even a harder time to translate this in transport. That's the reality, and that's what we are talking about. However, when it comes to decarbonization as such, not the renewabilization, but decarbonization, you can see here that there is room for maneuver. So there is a lot of things that we can do. And where's the problem? The problem has been described by Der Spiegel, which is, I think, the leading magazine in Germany, political magazine, quite recently, 1 month ago, with the title Murks in Germany, which is bullshit in Germany when it comes to the energy transition. And they have, I just took out one idea that has been described there. Germany decided 10 years ago to build a new power grid, or to invest into the power grid. It was planned to have 7,700 kilometers more. They realized in these 10 years 950. Only in 2017, 30 kilometers have been built. You see what's left. So that's the reality. Policymakers cannot cope with this challenge to build the grid that is needed fast enough. Also, that was last Sunday in Bloomberg. Sweden's electric car boom is under threat from power crunch. It's not that we criticize the battery electric cars. No, the grid is not stable and strong enough to help these guys who are, innovative, who buy the battery car to recharge. That's our problem. And that is why, I think I jump here. I would like to show this and to explain why hydrogen is an interesting addition. It's not either or, it's an addition. Here you can see that 8 power pylons carry 3 gigawatt each. On the left-hand side, you see the same amount of energy carried by a pipeline. And this pipeline can have natural gas, the pipeline can have hydrogen. We have special hydrogen pipelines. This one here is out of polyethylene. You have pipelines that are made out of steel, and they exist. This is Dutch, you're Dutch. This is a Dutch. Oh, sorry. But this is a Dutch product, and you can see this is small. You can scale it up, and you can put this into an existing pipeline and carry hydrogen only in it. It's polyethylene with a carbon fiber ring that can stand 200 bar of pressure. And having said that, I think we need to understand that renewables and the creation, the generation of hydrogen will happen in these parts of Europe mainly. That's where it takes place, but not enough. And if you see where we need to abate, it's not always the same. We need to abate, you saw the Spanish example, there you have a lot of renewable possibilities, but the abatement is rather needed in the north, in northwest. And if you compare this to the global situation, that's the global situation, the dark spots indicate where you can cheaply or cheaper produce hydrogen. So you can see very dark, it's less than 1.6 US dollars per kilogram of hydrogen. And you can see easily that Europe is not the best place to produce all this. It's other places in the world, and that is why it makes sense to discuss how to transport this gaseous electricity, if you wish, how to transport this from one place to the other. Now, let me come to one very, very important point. We are not the silver bullet hydrogen, and we are not the only kid in town. Here's our friends, biogas. Biogas is an important factor and an important element that can help to integrate more renewables into the power system, into the energy system. You can see there are crops, but we would say it should be second generation biogas, which is rather waste and animal manure, food waste, agricultural residues. These are the main elements that should be part of it. And then you have biogas and biomethane. However, if you look at this here, we can help our friends, our cousins, to be even more efficient, because with electricity and renewably produced hydrogen, you can have the gas upgrading, because the biogas world has in Europe 300 million tons of CO2 waste. This is good CO2. This is biogenic, circular CO2. If we do the methanation, we get the same product as natural gas, but it's completely renewably produced or biogenic. That's green. And that is something that can help to decarbonize or to make it more renewable, and that's important. In the end, and that's figures not by us, that's figures by Navigant. In the end, I think the pointer works. You see that electricity, still with 4,460 terawatt hours in 2050, will be the big supplier of energy and renewable energy. However, biomethane with 1,170 and hydrogen with 1,710 will help to make the system really more renewable. And you can see on the other side that it's power, of course, being one of the big consumer, but also industry and buildings and transport. These are the factors, and these figures have been put together by Navigant for Gas for Climate. Who can do the job? Where do we start all this? Where can the hydrogen and the biogas economy kick off? I would start with the industrial hubs, and I would mention one example. That's the port of Rotterdam, where you have 20% of CO2 emissions in one port only, 20% of the CO2 emissions of the whole Netherlands in one port. Why? Because it's a lot of heavy industry, it's a lot of industry there, especially refineries. And in refining, you need hydrogen as a feedstock, as a chemical feedstock. If you replace the conventional hydrogen by renewably produced hydrogen, you abate CO2 by a factor of 10, like this. Now, it's simple, it's doable, and that's why we build on these industrial hubs to be the first movers, to be the first starters for hydrogen economy. We will listen to Wouter van Hout later on. He is an expert in the implementation of RED II, Renewable Energy Directive II, also, yeah, you know a lot about it. And we know that if we do it correctly, if the Commission does the right delegated acts, and member states have an incentive to tell their refineries, hey, replace conventional by renewable hydrogen, we don't need subsidies. This is a business on its own. It's a big business because refining in Europe at the moment is the biggest market. Then it's fertilizers for hydrogen as a feedstock. And that is why we build on these industrial hubs combined with gas grids. I mentioned that already. I gave you this piece of a pipeline that shows you that this combination is possible. And of course, international trade plays a role. We cannot decarbonize the steel industry, the petrochemical industry, and the chemical industry with windmills that are in our gardens. Yeah? We need to be honest about that. We need to import renewably produced hydrogen, and there international trade, international imports play a role. We see big developments in other parts of the world, in Japan, where the IEA summit, where the G20 summit took place, and the IEA delivered a paper on the hydrogen economy, and there it's pretty clear. Kawasaki, a company that produces vessels for liquefied hydrogen, very cool hydrogen, cold hydrogen, they are ready. These vessels will be ready as of next year. So you will see international trade also, and then, only then, I think there will be also an incentive for mobility to ramp up. I have a hydrogen car. It's a wonderful car. It works. It's not science fiction. It's for me reality. However, it's not that many cars at the moment running around on hydrogen. And we know that. We know that the technology is extremely mature. My car is second generation already. But there are some bottlenecks. And we believe that if we ramp up the industrial dimension, mobility will come quite naturally. But we need to do that. These are figures from our hydrogen roadmap that McKinsey put together for us. It's very simple to understand. You have two scenarios. You have a business as usual scenario, and for 2030, you see that these thin lines there indicate that hydrogen business, hydrogen applications in transportation, heating, industry, energy, new feedstock will not take up if we just do business as usual. Only if we go for an ambitious scenario, which is 1.5 degree, the Paris scenario, then you will see already in 2030, so in 10 years, quite a substantial take-up of hydrogen technologies and systems. And in 2050, you see how much it then can, how big it can be, and that's an important development, but that needs a collaborative approach. Here you see the applications that we expect. The triangle shows you the market acceptance with the ambitious scenario, the blue ones, the white ones with the business as usual scenario. You see in mobility, most of the mass market expectation is foreseen for 2020, 2025. But in industry, it's also 25, but even earlier, steelmaking, earlier. That all is quite promising and tells us that hydrogen is an enabler. Hydrogen can help. It's not the silver bullet, but it needs to be ramped up quite now. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jorgo. Very clear. You are ready to take up the challenge from the Commission. I also noted that it's not renewable electricity versus renewable gases, it's and, so that's a really positive signal. Can I ask James to deliver the next presentation? I forgot to say that Henrik will also be around for the Q&A, so if you have questions for Henrik, please also put them on Slido. Thank you. James.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation to come here today. And indeed, what I'm going to be presenting on is the infrastructure available for renewable gases. And just to be clear, what I'm talking about in renewable gases, we're talking about biomethane, biogas, but also the hydrogen that is produced from renewable electricity. So there is some overlap with what Jorgo has said. And I could just start by saying, yes, the infrastructure can handle everything we need, so thank you very much, I'm off for another shower. But I think that probably you want to hear a bit more detail than that. So allow me, if you will. We're talking about industry today. I think you should be given a few facts, a few little factoids. Always helps put things into the context of which we're discussing. 1/5 of European GDP comes from its industrial manufacturing sector. A quarter of the employees of Europe are in the industrial manufacturing sector, and 80% of research and innovation is in the manufacturing sector. So it is a hugely important economic sector for us. It's a hugely important economic sector for me because I'm representing the European gas industries. 30% of the energy that is consumed by our industries is natural gas today. So we are very much feeding the industry. We are helping them be competitive, and we're making sure that they are able to deliver the products that we need in a very sustainable way. The issue has arisen, in a way, if you look at the European Commission's long-term strategy last year, where it said that by 2050, we need to be heading towards carbon neutrality. And as you probably follow the media as much as I do, you will see that member state after member state is endorsing this objective, which is a good thing. But it means that how are we going to maintain the competitiveness of that industry, which today depends on natural gas, which is around 16 euros a megawatt hour in Germany, and our renewable gas friends, which are a little bit more expensive than that, I will say. So we have to think very carefully about how we're going to actually maintain our industries. And then I will return back to the points that we need to look at, the infrastructure. We certainly have all the technologies. There's no doubt about that. We have anaerobic digesters, we have electrolyzers. I would even go on to say outside of renewable for the decarbonised gases, we also have CCS and CCU. So we simply have all the technologies that we need to achieve the European Commission's objective, which is soon, I imagine, to be a member state objective as well. So this isn't about technological fairy stories. So Jorgo says he's driving a hydrogen car. This is real. They're all real today. They can be deployed. The good thing that I will say, to go back to my initial flippant point, is that the infrastructure is there. Now, we can start from the very top for renewable gases, and we can say, okay, how are you making renewable gases? Well, with biomethane and biogas, that's generally through anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digesters are produced in Europe today. Europe is the leading manufacturing region of anaerobic digesters in the world. And it would make sense to me if we were to continue pushing that, building an industrial strategy around the new technologies like electrolyzers, like anaerobic digesters, which are basically the equivalent of what extraction technology is today and will be today and in the future. Those are our upstream for the future, anaerobic digesters, electrolyzers, and of course, I will still insist on it, also extraction of natural gas so that we can use it through CCS. I'll try to stick to renewable because that's what I was asked to talk about on the infrastructure side. So the reality is that we have the technologies to do the equivalent of extraction, the production of that gas. So we have it. We need an industrial strategy to make sure Europe stays as the leader, and we learn from mistakes that we've made elsewhere. After that, you have to transport that gas. You need a transmission system. Next bit of good news. If we're talking about biogas and biomethane, the transmission system can basically carry that gas almost unchanged. So this isn't a cost implication at all. If we are talking about hydrogen and green hydrogen or hydrogen from renewable electricity, then of course we do have to look at what sort of upgrades we have. I think, Jorgo's already passed out his tube, his pipe, I should say. And we don't have to dig all of the pipes up or take them out of the sea or whatever we have to do. In fact, we can sleeve. Sleeve is a very simple process. It can be done. We have the technology today to do it, so it's not intrusive. So if we want to do more H2, we can. But anyway, modern transmission systems are being built with the ability to carry 80% hydrogen in any case. So the transmission system is in a pretty good place. In an even better place is the distribution system. Many of you may not be aware of this, but before we had the natural gas revolution in the 60s and 70s, many of the cities of Europe were being run on a mix of gas, which was methane and hydrogen, even as high as 50 or 60%. In Germany, it was called Stadtgas. In Britain, it's called town gas. Cities like Leipzig, Dresden, Leeds, Manchester, they all built on this town gas. And guess what? When we had the natural gas revolution, the cost coming down, people went around, they went to the houses. They changed the boilers, and they changed the valves and the compressors, and basically they continued to use the pipes that were put down for the distribution system. And you know what? If we were able to do that in the past, I'm pretty sure we could do it in the future. I mean, we're not talking about brain surgery here on an energy system. We're talking about upgrades, small, effective, efficient upgrades. And you know what? You don't have to have 8 pylons to carry the same. You just have to open the ground occasionally and put the compressors and valves in place. So it's not very intrusive. And I think that when we talk in Brussels often about the energy transition, because we're all lobbyists, regulators, we love it, we talk about regulation and getting that right. We talk about investments and getting that right. And then we're happy because we think we've done it all. We pat ourselves on the back and we go home. And then nothing happens, like Jorgo shows on his high voltage frequency line. I'm like, why didn't anything happen? Because the public won't accept it. And we forget about public acceptance too often. And I think that if we are able to utilise the infrastructure that we have today, we will see much less opposition than we see at the moment to the energy transition. Because if you are being faced with the idea that you have to rip everything out of your home to replace with something else, or you just change your boiler and a few valves, I think most people will take that. And I think this is a really important element that we need to work on more in Brussels, about understanding the public acceptance element. And that's why I think using the existing infrastructure is a very good idea to reduce opposition to what we need to do. I will touch on a couple of other points, if I may. I'm not sure how much time I've got. But just to say, people question why we continue to build things like LNG terminals. I can say that we are able to transfer those into liquid fuels, liquid gas fuels, so we can continue to use them. They're not stranded assets. You see things like bio-LPG. Bio-LPG is being used in industry today. So LPG, liquid petroleum gas, these things are indeed existing at a bio level already. So these renewable gases are already there. And I would take the point that was made by Jorgo about the global view. When you're actually thinking about the hydrogen that you want to produce from renewable electricity, it certainly makes sense to produce it in places like the Middle East, where solar is, the cheapest electricity generation on the planet. Well, of course, they don't need all of the electricity that they will generate, so they can easily sell us hydrogen where they sell us carbohydrates today. So I think that we should be thinking much more about a global policy. Climate change is a global issue. It will not be solved by local solutions. It makes sense, if you also consider my point for industrial strategy, that we sell anaerobic digesters and electrolyzers to our neighbours to give us the premium products that we want. This is entirely consequent with being a good neighbour, as we have been for many, many years. To go back to industry, because that's what we're really talking about, I said all the products that are available, the infrastructure is available, we can use it, we can deliver. Industry will always look at the cost. They were always concerned. They would even say that going from coking coal to natural gas is too expensive. So we need to make sure that we create the framework that allows them to maintain the competitiveness for as long as it takes, maybe 10 years, to bring our gases into a competitive framework. And I think that is really important, and we must think about that for industry. And I will take my note and will wrap up, and I will just say this. We are all in it together. This is not about gas versus electricity versus liquid. In fact, we need it all. We have to have a multi-vectored future. It is the only way we can decarbonise the hard-to-reach parts of the economy and ensure that we can continue to have a leading European manufacturing sector that still produces a fifth of our GDP, that still employs a quarter of our employees. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, James, for a very positive and energizing speech. When I heard about town gas, I thought, back to the future, is that your slogan? Let's hear from Patrick Clarence. He is in charge of our co-organizer, Energy Technologies Europe. So, Patrick, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So, I'm an energy enthusiast like you probably are, like the ones on the stage are for sure. I'm working in this sector now since 15 years, looking at obviously the Clean Energy Hub now, Energy Technologies Europe, but also at Waste to Energy, at Energy Storage, different hats I'm wearing. And what we see is the integration of the assets. We see the integration of different carriers. We see moving together of the systems, of the energy systems. We see that IT is penetrating everywhere, and this is happening in our sector too. But how do we make it happen? And that's something which we heard. We need to get it done. And what are, for examples? And I will give you some examples. And obviously, you can always do two things. You can build new assets, or you can repurpose existing assets, or you can do both. And what we will end up with, obviously, do both. And I will show you some examples what is done. First of all, an asset which we have today, and I will maybe show you the picture, which is fine here. I love this picture here. No, it's not here. Whoop. Then I will use this one. It's an asset which is fenced, which is permitted, which is linked to the distribution system, or to the transmission system in this case, which is linked to district heating systems, very often, and which is linked, that's for you, Paul, and which is linked to the gas system, if it's a gas plant, or has gas burners at least. And by using those and not throwing them away, you are faster in building them. We heard public acceptance before. Public acceptance is then no issue because you have it permitted. You are cheaper because you recycle a lot of the infrastructure existing, and you kickstart what Jorgo said. We need to kickstart the renewable gases market. We need to create the demand for it, because if we create the demand, then we can also have it rolled out. And this is an example, and it's a coal plant. I'm not sure you saw any picture of any coal plant in this Sustainable Energy Week. So that's one I had to put down. It's one which is repurposed, where they used biomass, bio-waste to be exact, from forestry to make biogases. And this gas is burned in the plant. And in this plant, they reduce up to 40% of CO2 emission. So you don't want to cut off all the trees, but you could use the same plant now and put an electrolyzer next to it and take electricity from the renewable wind, which would balance the other 60% and make it a CO2-free power generation. It's working there, and it is allowing for these assets to have a second life, because we want to decarbonize. We heard it by 2050, and it was very clear that it's 80 to 95% of reduction. And we heard that we have the cities and everywhere going there. It's cheaper, and we reduce the CO2 emissions. But also by being able to have these electrolyzers going or not going, you increase the flexibility of the system, because you can balance between the biomass gases and the hydrogen gases, and you need a lot shorter time for modification. And what is not said on this slide is the local economy is profiting. They source for 15 million locally wood waste, and the local population is profiting from it. They're not importing coal from the States or somewhere else. And that's also a positive effect, creating local jobs. This is another example. Here we have turbines, combined cycle plants in the Netherlands, which is converting the turbine to allowing pure hydrogen combustion. We heard the discussion about pipelines and sleeves and what we need to do, but we need also to adapt the rest of the situation. And it's working. It's done. They're implementing it now. They know how to do it, and they make it now happen. It's not that we have no clue what to do. We know what to do, and we can put it in. But this one is a low-carbon hydrogen, I would say, because they take fossil gases, but they decarbonize it, and they use the CO2 and store them on the ground offshore, allowing therefore that CO2 stays on the ground and only the hydrogen is taken out. And it's a question we have to ask ourselves. We've been in Madrid discussing this. Are we looking at only going for green hydrogen, electricity-based? Do we have the possibilities and the quantities and the cost? Or are we also looking, at least to start, with decarbonizing existing gases and storing the CO2 underground? So the cost issue will not go to this, but it's a significant reduction, and it will kickstart again the economy, and in 6 years you will have it running and needing a lot of green hydrogen being there. So it's way before the 2030 renewable energy targets of 32% of renewable energy, and it's enough time to replicate this around Europe by 2050 when we want to be carbon free. So it's a timely demonstration of this technology. But we need to go further. We are talking about industry. James was talking about the need of industry in there. And industry is, there's a slide missing then. Oh, I wanted to give you a slide about the need to have these energy hubs coming in for industry places, for harbors, we heard this, for any refineries. Basically, putting down an electrolyzer which can balance the flexibility of the variable renewables and which can create the gases. We are now discussing to put the first one down in Romania with a steel mill. They want to use the hydrogen for the reduction of CO2 from the process of working in the steel, melting the steel. They want to use this green hydrogen to then make methanol, which a local chemical industry needs. And they want to use the energy, a lot of the energy coming from a windmill, which is curtailed for the moment very often and not compensated to 100% of the costs. And this is how you make synergies. You take the different blocks, you put them together, and you have a win-win-win situation in this case, where we demonstrate the application and the possibilities of doing this. So now is the moment to roll it out, to gain the experience, to have the skilled persons, because it's all about the skills you need to roll it out, and to start this low-carbon economy. The last slide shows you just the brains behind this clean energy hub idea, companies implementing this idea on how to make this Magnum plant, the gas plant, and the other plants function in a clean way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Patrick. I think the word that stands out for me is conversion of existing assets to be compatible with the future, but also conversion between different types of energy. Brilliant presentation, thanks a lot. Can I ask the second set of panelists, or the members of the second panel, to also take their seats on the stage? And let me immediately begin by calling on Jan van Aken, who is our first speaker in this second panel. He is Secretary General of EFET, the European Federation of Energy Traders. Jan, please go ahead.
European Federation of Energy Traders has as slogan, so you can rely on the market. We are not big fans of subsidies. We believe that if you have good market-based mechanisms, you can do a lot much more efficient. The title of the presentation is Potential of the Market for Renewable Electricity, Biomethane and Renewable Hydrogen for Guarantees of Origins. The three ways of writing that. It is to unlock the potential that there is. There are a lot of environmentally conscious consumers and companies that are interested in green electrons and green molecules. They're willing to pay more. They are creating demand for this. They are creating financial incentives and opportunities for the production of these green electrons and green molecules. So guarantees of origin facilitate demand and supply. Guarantees of origins is a proven concept in the electricity industry. It works quite well. It facilitates the buying and the selling, and that is trading. Trading is just buying and selling. The green value on top of the electricity price and on top of the gas price. So GEOs is a very efficient system, existing in electricity, and it will be set up for the gas industry. It's much more efficient than subsidies. Not everyone likes that to hear, but a market-based mechanism helps to do it in an efficient way. Actually, today we sent out a press release of something else that's not officially the topic, but we launched PPAs, that is Commercial Power Purchase Agreements, which is actually a very good cooperation with Resource Europe, which is with Wind Europe and Solar Europe. In the past, we would never think we had such a good cooperation with these organizations because they were always asking for subsidies. But now they believe also in market-based mechanisms, and we have set up these PPAs, which is a standard contract that can be used by both the project developers, the banks, the buyers, and the sellers. Basically, it's the same principle. You use the market-based mechanisms, but GOs can do the same thing. But it's an efficient system, but there are two major conditions. First of all, it must be a trusted, robust, and reliable system. And we must go for one harmonized European system. In the long run, for all GOs, for renewable and low carbon gases and liquids. That's the vision. For a trusted and reliable system, we need trusted and reliable partners. AIB, regulators, TSOs, they are trusted, they can play a very important role for this. But we also need European standardized procedures. We don't want in every country different rules and definitions. We want cross-border solution, that's optimizing. We need credible products with clear definitions. we need definitions for words, what so certain words are meaning. And we have a very good RED too, but there might be some new extensions needed for the longer run. So there are some key challenges still. All member states should be required to ensure that GOs are made available to the market and can be tailored according to the customer preferences. Require to use GOs also for low carbon and decarbonized gas. And member states should opt for issuing GOs to producers, taking into account the value of possible support schemes. And it should be easily identifiable if GOs are renewable or low carbon or decarbonized. And once you have good GOs, you can have more elaborate certificates, where the next speaker will talk more about. So to come to one harmonized European system in the long run for all GOs, for low carbon gases and liquids, we need European definitions, but also standards. And the good thing is that CEN is working on such a standard, 16,325. Once that is established and accepted, then there's a very good basis to build on that. And last but not least, what is needed is good cooperation between many parties in the gas industry. For instance, ARB, Hydrogen Europe, ERGAR, who's not here, but also play an important role, ENSOC, GIE, CEN, the European Commission, Eurogas, and EVET. I think, although we're sometimes very critical about each other, overall, I think the cooperation in Europe is very good. Gas is even more complicated than electricity net, because there are many more different products and so. But there is an open mind. I think there's a very good opportunity now to work together, make it happen, and let's create a market for this interesting new field. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jan. We've heard from the industry that we need a European or even global strategy. I think that fits extremely well with your call for harmonization. So I think we are onto something here. And to tell us more about the initiatives on GOs for renewable hydrogen is Wouter van Hout from EUSEW, but also speaking from his experience in the Certify project. Wouter.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for having me invited as well. So I'm here actually on behalf of a project I've been coordinating since back 2014. And this is to create the first European-wide green and low-carbon hydrogen tracking system. So this project has been financed by the European Commission through the FCHGU, which is the public-private partnership between the European Commission and the fuel cell hydrogen industry, of which Hydrogen Europe is the industrial representation. I think what have already been mentioned quite a while is that, or a new buzzword at least, is sector coupling. And at first people thought about bringing electricity into transport, bringing biomass into natural gas, etc. So it's linking primary energy sources into new applications. But what's already been demonstrated by some of the previous presentations is that we get now more and more technologies such as digesters, electrolyzers, methanizers, etc. that are also converting one energy vector into another. And sometimes you can have pathways leading back to the same result. I'll give you one example. If you follow the yellow arrow, you can have renewable electricity converted into renewable hydrogen through electrolysis. It might be put into an electrolyzer to produce renewable electricity once again. So you will have conversion of energy vectors, and this is rather new. Same thing, you can have biomass-based pathways. They can produce hydrogen from that. You can recombine it with CO2. You can then make synthetic methane. You can inject that back into the natural gas grid, and this will be bio-based natural gas. So we will deal a lot with those conversions into the future. On top of that, as Hendrik Drem already mentioned before, there's quite a lot of new regulation coming up. For instance, for fuel suppliers to achieve 14% of renewable energy into transport. And that means we need to track actually from primary energy sources, knowing that we'll be converted once or more from one energy vector into another, into a final application. Final application being transport, heating, cooling, power, etc. So this definitely will require a very robust tracking system. How can we track from the left all the way up to the right, knowing that the energy vector might have many different forms? And this is actually what we've been trying to achieve from a hydrogen point of view back since 2014. This shows that currently we just finalized our second phase. And that means we've been entering into a pilot, and we are actually now ready for a commercial takeoff. We know that there's still quite a lot of developments to be done, but we're getting near to deployment. And what I would like to showcase is that one of the results of this pilot is that we put in place an ICT system. It's a registry, it's a database. And I show you some stats from January and February 2019, where you can see that more than 2,700 of renewable hydrogen GEOs have been issued, they've been created. 2,700 guarantees of origin. That means 2.7 gigawatt hours of renewable hydrogen. I think this is quite a success for a pilot project. And you can already see the very first commercial announcements, press releases of, for instance, Air Products saying through these GEOs, through this instrument, they're able to give confidence to their customer, being either Transport for London, having fuel cell buses, or H2 Mobility Germany, providing the hydrogen refueling station infrastructure into Germany with renewable hydrogen. And they're willing to pay a premium price. So we really find that fantastic that we already see the very first commercial uptake. And so what have been the different plants that have been added to this pilot and in creating these renewable hydrogen GEOs? You can see the 4 pilot plants over here. On the left-hand side, we have, first of all, a steam methane reformer by Air Liquide that's been using natural gas but also been using biomethane GEOs to create renewable hydrogen. You have a combined project between Air Products and Nourion, so that's a chloralkali electrolyzer, again an existing asset. They've been entering into a power purchase agreement with a new unsupported offshore Dutch wind farm. We have the Colruyt Group. This is water electrolysis, so new installations when you can even see the windmill and the containerized electrolyzer on site. We also have Uniper, which is in Germany, grid-connected renewable electricity and a water electrolyzer. And I think what I would like to showcase with those examples is that for hydrogen, it's an energy vector. It's not a primary energy source. So that means we need certain primary energy, being it biomethane, being it renewable electricity, and we need to demonstrate what is the primary input we've been using to produce that hydrogen. So for us, working on a harmonized system, working on a reliable system with the same kind of governance, with the same kind of rules, it's extremely important because we need to avoid double counting. We need to give this comfort and this credibility towards policymakers and customers to create finally a market, and this will kickstart investment. So I do hear all of your appeals, and I 100% agree with that. Certify has been much inspired actually by the system that's called EECS, which have been set up by the Association of Issuing Bodies. And so we have a very similar structure in terms of governance. And now we're actually going into much more detailed communication together with AIB. So we're having a look on what are the data fields on their GOs. What are the typical needs for the hydrogen industry, which might differ from renewable electricity needs? And also we're in close contact with the people from ERGAR to understand the gas world. Typically hydrogen works in lower heating value, gas world in higher heating value, and the electricity world never heard about such things. So there's a common language to be developed amongst ourselves. And I'm very glad to announce, and I hope that Dirk was already aware of this, but the president of the board of AIB has signed up a letter of intent to collaborate with Certify going to the next level. We're also having deep discussions together with ERGAR, and it's actually back, I think 1.5 years ago, AIB and Certify who took the initiative to go to the Commission, to go to Sensenelec and request for an update of the SEN standard. The SEN standard that is existing is only dealing with renewable electricity GOs, and we've been asking to change it and also make it one standard dealing with all energy vectors. So I think we're actually going on the good way. I do agree with everything that I heard today, and I'm very excited that we can really see this shaping and getting closer to reality. Thank you.
Minder.
I always compensate for you.
Great presentation. Thanks, Wouter. Congratulations to Certify on the successful pilot. Just to give you a target to work towards, let me remind you that last year there were, just within the 21 member states of AIB, there were over 500 terawatt hours of electricity claimed as used from renewable sources. So I think a successful pilot now has a clear target to move to. The last presenter in this panel and in the whole session will be Irina. Irina will be speaking from her role in ENTSO-G. So I invite her to the floor for the final presentations before we go to the Q&A. Irina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for invitation. Today, I will be speaking on behalf of NSOC and GIE and presenting you the policy recommendations that we have developed together with our prime mover group on guarantees of origin for renewable and non-renewable low-carbon gases. And I will also touch upon in my presentation about the lessons that we could learn from the electricity sector. So coming back to the timeline, last October at the Madrid Forum, the importance of GO was recognized, and NSOC and GAE went away and developed policy recommendations on how to implement GOs for gas. What we have done is that we established a prime mover group involving IFED, Eurogas, NGVA, Certify, AIB, ERGAR, and together we have discussed the content of these policy recommendations over a few telcos and meetings. Also in May we had an open gas industry stakeholders workshop where the policy recommendations were tested, and afterwards they were refined and presented to Madrid Forum in June, actually a couple of weeks ago. So the next step for us would be to refine these recommendations later this year and come back to the Madrid Forum, and I will talk about it also at the end of my presentation. What we have done is that we developed the policy recommendations that could be split in 3 groups, as you can see here on the slide. The first group is the standardized GOs for renewable and non-renewable low-carbon gases. The second one is about the interoperability of GO schemes. And the third one is about compatibility of GOs with, for example, sustainability certificates or CO2 quota system or CO2 emission standards for vehicles. And on the next slide, I copied here a few recommendations. Actually, the whole list of recommendations is online at the Madrid Forum website, where you can download it as a background document. Here on the slide, I just copied a few examples for your attention. The first couple of recommendations are addressed to member states. Member states are encouraged to also issue GOs for renewable and low carbon gases. And member states are encouraged to disclose the origins of the energy source using the guarantees of origin. Also, to echo what have been said before, we support the extension of the SEN standard to include GOs for gaseous energy carriers. And we believe that this should be done in cooperation with the issuing bodies, and also there should be a representative of the gas industry on the technical committee. The next couple of recommendations are to be in conjunction with the interoperability of GOs that I've talked about before. And this interoperability concept is actually twofold. On the one hand, all guarantees of origin need to be convertible from one energy carrier to another, where such physical conversion is taking place. And secondly, we need to establish cooperation of national issuing bodies and potentially also have the EU-wide framework by the end of this year. And the last recommendation that I wanted to mention today is about the GOs and sustainability certificates. We believe it is important to avoid the double disclosure for the same amount of energy. Actually, on these two slides that I talked about, you can see that the title is Initial Joint Recommendations. Obviously, joint is because they have been developed by ENSOC and GIE and in cooperation with Prime Movers Group. Why they're initial? Because we believe that after we have presented them to Madrid Forum earlier this month, we need to go away and refine the recommendations, make them more detailed. As for the lessons that could be learned from the electricity sector, some of the examples that can be considered is common understanding of the data included in GOs, and we need to pay attention to operational aspects such as data format, data fields, and data protection. Secondly, transparency requirements are important, and all GOs must comply with the same transparency requirements regardless of the energy carrier for which they're issued or from which issuing body they're coming from. And once again, to echo what has been said before about the terminology, we believe it is important to have common understanding of concepts that we're using. We're using the same words, but quite often we understand these words differently and we imply different meanings in these words. And that's why we welcome the work that has been done for the Madrid Forum in June about the aligned gas terminology. It is important also to highlight that we believe sufficient time is needed in order to analyze what lessons could be learned from the electricity sector, and this may not be quite straightforward. So to conclude, I would like to reiterate that we believe we have still some work to do, and ENSOC and GE are happy to facilitate the discussions of the industry and to provide for detailed policy recommendations and detailed legislative proposals for the next Madrid Forum in October. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Irina. Great to hear such concrete recommendations for both the policy and the market actors. Actually, you are the greatest panel I have ever worked with in any EUSEW event because we are finished even ahead of time. This is really something which is commendable. So thank you for your discipline and your interesting presentations. Let me ask to go to the Q&A then. Let's use the time that is left as good as we can. But before having a look at the questions coming from the room, I would like to abuse my position to raise two questions to some panelists. The first one is, Patrick mentioned that actually there are so many solutions already which are already there, but I would like to raise a question to James. We've been hearing about renewable electricity, solar, wind for 15 years now. We've been hearing about hydrogen at least as long, but why have we heard so little about renewable gases until recently? And why is there not something like RE100 in the gas sector?
So I think that one of the things I would say is that ultimately, when a lot of countries drew up the support they were going to put in place under the original climate and renewable energy package, they looked indeed at electricity as one of the main areas to address carbon emissions. Because of course coal was very prevalent and indeed still is today. 9 of the 10 top CO2 producing entities are coal burning power plants in Europe today. So I think that there was this sort of bias in a way, if you like, looking at that. It doesn't mean we didn't bring any biogas or biomethane on. We have 4% today in the mix, corresponding roughly to about 20 billion cubic meters a year. That's growing. We see in France you've gone from 2014 around 11 biomethane installations to today, where we're over 80, and that is a trend that is continuing to gather momentum. So we are seeing that there is some investments going into this. But I think the original package, when it was set up, there was a greater bias trying to address the much more obvious CO2 problems that were being delivered by coal and electricity. And indeed, that's still an issue that needs to be addressed and still needs to be taken on. And those 9 out of 10 that I mentioned, I wonder how many will still be existing in 2030 because they're all in Germany and Poland. So that's another issue that you have to take into consideration. I think from a gas perspective, we would like to see, again, a renewed interest, a renewed energy put in to bringing renewable gas forward. We totally agree with what EFET have been saying, and I also took part in the work they've been doing, EFET, I said EFET, but, and what EUSEW have been doing in relation to GEOs. I think we really need to get GEOs for gas right. We sometimes have a discussion whether GEOs are the cherry on the cake that we need, or whether they're the cake themselves in terms of the incentive to drive things forward. Either way, I don't think it matters. You need them. You need a system that works. It needs to have that interoperability. And I think that if we can do that, we can certainly drive more investment into it. And to answer your question, then that would mean that you get the chance where you will have more of what you would call power purchasing agreements, maybe call them energy purchasing agreements, like you have in RE100 in the gas sector. For example, I know of some that already exist. L'Oreal have one. Taking biogas, Schiphol Airport use some certificates for biogas. So it's not that they don't exist. It is true that you can do it, but it's formative, and we need to grow it. It's like an acorn that we need to turn into an oak. So in that respect, I think we just need to get behind it. The good news is we've got the gas package coming up, so we can examine again what are the opportunities to make sure we do get that energy back into this. So I believe that we have probably, as a society, addressed or tried to address where we saw the worst CO2 emissions, but now we need to get on with making sure that we're able to get the best out of the gas sector.
Okay, thanks. Talking about the gas package, let me invite also Henrik to the stage. Do you still have a microphone, Henrik?
I didn't have a microphone at all. But,
okay.
I think I can speak loud enough.
Please, because I also would like to raise one of Irina's challenges to you about not having a disclosure mechanism in place in the RED II for the renewable gases. So maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah. So the way it is in the Renewable Energy Directive, there is a disclosure obligation for the electricity suppliers only. There is no direct obligation for heat or gas suppliers. This is, however, still incentivized by the Renewable Energy Directive in the sense that the objective of the guarantees of origin is to prove to renewable energy consumers the origin of the energy they consume. But there is no legal requirement at European level for that. So that means that, at member state level, you can very easily implement that. There's nothing preventing that in the directive. Mm-hmm. The extent to which and how this will be addressed in the gas package, if such one comes, that is still to be seen and developed.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, indeed, yesterday you were in this very same room and you were getting questions about full disclosure of electricity. So clearly, there are still people who want more to come out of the Commission. Let's hope the gas package delivers a lot of that.
Well, let me just say that the full disclosure was actually also considered, but we didn't go through with it.
I know. Yes, Patrick.
Will we get a full disclosure of the guarantee of origin prices? You said that we have the guarantee of origins. You didn't say how much they were selling. Is there something which will be done on this?
I think if I refer to electricity, I think currently quite a lot of the trade of guarantee of origin is being done over the counter. So that means you can call to a certain broker. He will tell you a certain price, and you can buy it from them. You don't know at what amount he's been purchasing those guarantees of origin. I think that's the way it's been functioning today. I see for renewable electricity, we see also name passing brokers. So that are more platforms where you know who the seller and who the buyer is, and the broker is taking a certain fixed fee on the transaction itself. We also see that AIB, I think, is publishing, if I'm not mistaken, some stats of generic renewable electricity GOs. In the case of Certify, we are just dealing with a pilot. We only had 4 pilot producing plants. So for collusion reasons, we're not able to make any or discuss any prices in a room with 4 potential suppliers. That being said, in a third phase of Certify, we are really looking forward to make the market, and I would really like to reach out to Evert and Jan van Aken, because we also see that the brokerage landscape has been changing. When we started back in 2014, they've been telling us go for 2 simple products, call it green and blue hydrogen, and create market liquidity. Currently, we have a feeling that brokers are needing more niche products because they can have more higher markets into that. So it's an open invitation for collaborating on supporting your organization needs. And on top of that, we would like to organize certain auctions to give some price ideas, at least to kickstart the market.
So we will see it, we will get it.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Yes, before we start having... Oh, okay, Irina. I can't refuse you.
I just wanted to react to what I heard from Henrik. We do indeed recognize that nothing prevents member states to disclose the energy source origin, in any case, even if it's not specified at the European level, but we do welcome that if there was such a certainty at the European level in the gas directive or something, that it will be much more appreciated, because you have the certainty that this is an obligation that would have to be implemented. Whereas if it's not clearly stated, there is still an optionality foreseen. Yeah.
Clear. Okay, I think it's high time to give the word to the floor, even if it's through this instrument of Slido. We've heard about green, we've heard about blue, but something that was not mentioned, I think, yet is nuclear. Right. So I put this question to you, Jorgo. How about the link between hydrogen and nuclear power?
It's possible. As you know, it's up to the member states. If you ask the Commission, they will say, it's the member states to decide. That's what I would say. Member states, it's not. Technically, it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, sure.
I stop there.
Patrick?
If you want to decarbonize a society, and that's our aim, I believe the question is not how we decarbonize. We want to decarbonize. Then you can have people who say, I don't like nuclear. Others say, I don't want to use biomass because biomass is needed in the forests and we don't want to chop it down to burn it. Why do we do this? So there are different approaches. And we have a European Union with different mentalities, different countries, different interests. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the pure aim, which is decarbonization by 2050, then you should certify the hydrogen following the carbon content. And you shouldn't certify it if it's a blue hydrogen, which means carbon capture and storage, a green hydrogen, which is renewable energy, or a red hydrogen, as this is sometimes called. You should only certify the carbon content. To 0 carbon content, 5%, I don't know if 0 is possible, 5%, 10, 20, whatever it is, and give some freedom for the people to buy it. And you will see some companies will then say, I'm very happy that we don't chop down trees and make biomass combustion to then make hydrogen out of this, or biogases, but that we use nuclear. And others will say, no, nuclear, oh, not in my backyard. So again, I'm coming back to the products. Be transparent, be clear what you do, and give the information about the carbon content and the source.
Yeah, I fully agree in the sense that showing to consumers what is the impact, for instance, in terms of carbon of their behavior is a very powerful instrument. I fully agree with that. And I also hear several times that we shouldn't confuse the instruments with the goals. The goals indeed should be decarbonization. Okay, biomass was mentioned. There is a question on the bottom of the Slido. Is there a problem with limited resources? It was mentioned several times that sometimes we are counting too much on something which is not in unlimited supply. Anyone want to pick up that question? Jorgo?
Yes, there are several resources we don't think about. I mean, this morning there was a session here in this room where we talked about waste to hydrogen, plastics to hydrogen. So there are a lot of new resources and sources that you at the moment don't think about. When it comes to waste from agricultural products, we could be better in managing how to collect it, and I think we need to. Otherwise, we cannot achieve all these targets. In general, we have to say, none of the technologies can be dismissed. We have to take all the technologies into account. Again, there's no silver bullet.
But you missed, and this is very important, you've got to get the waste from agriculture, which is like manure, bullshit. So I could have said, Jorgo, bullshit. No, the reality is we always forget things like sewage and wastewater, because you can make biogas, biomethane, ultimately, if you upgrade it from those sources. And those are just waste today. They're kind of a burden on society. Actually, in a circular economy, you can take those and you can turn them into a new energy. So, you can actually build anaerobic digesters in cities next to sewage plants and actually inject that into the grid with very little impact on consumers. I mean, it's like a cost increase. So yeah, and I'm shouting bullshit. It's a bit of a joke in a way because we shouldn't forget the waste that is produced every day by millions of creatures.
It's a very important point. Do you know how freshwater drink water is cleaned up? With hydrogen. So a lot of utilities use hydrogen to clean up, to take out nitrate out of from fertilizers and from manure out of the water. So this is all about material flow management. And we have to become much better in that. And that is why it doesn't make sense, and I also see the question on the 80%. It doesn't make sense to measure with old methods, with simplified methods. It doesn't make sense. The 80% that you see there, that's a wonderful question. If we convert renewable energy into hydrogen and send it through pipelines and make electricity again, the so-called round trip, we are losing about 80%. Old counting, but this does not count the heat, because if you do it via a fuel cell, you get electricity plus heat. And also this is an old maths, so in the meanwhile we are a little bit more efficient. However, I have to say, if we don't do this, we curtail. We have zero efficiency. So 20% is even better than zero, I would say, in a world where we live in. And that's the whole question, why the rediscovery of hydrogen is in every of these discussions so eminent. Because we have to fight for every percent. We have to become ever more efficient, that's for sure. And even the turbine business, you mentioned the Magnum project, is not included into that calculation.
We're moving in a society where we'll have electricity in abundance. We will run around with PV on our clothes and charge our phones. Will not contradict me with this, I suppose.
No, I won't.
We will have PV everywhere. We will have windmills everywhere. We will have wave. We will have tidal, whatever we have. We have energy generation as much as we want. And the question in the future will not be, do we have enough electricity? The question will be, do we have it at the right moment? And this is where we're kicking in with the renewable gases, with the other storage, with all. It's getting the electricity from today to tomorrow. And this is the challenge. And also then from A to B by a gas-based system. And that's a challenge. So the question in future for me will not be, will we have enough electricity? The question will be, can we use it? At the moment, we need it.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to go.
The word is system efficiency. Do we have the right
It's a system.
efficiency, which is trying to find the right linkages, the right coupling places, the right interfaces in the system. And Europeans are quite good in doing that. They were quite good. And we need to rediscover that culture of engineering the right interfaces in a system again. And I think if we do it, Europe will be great again.
I predict you will run your charging phones will be done in your pocket with the PV on your shoulders. I predict this. Wait 5 or 10 years and we'll see what happens.
I would like to come back as well on this question on this round trip efficiency, because indeed, when you do this back of the envelope calculations, it seems it doesn't make there's no reason to work with hydrogen. And I think for me, the turning point was 1 year ago, when I saw a presentation launched by the European Commission. It's actually a study they've been doing using this difficult primes model. And when they launched for the very first time, they included hydrogen as a sector coupling tool into their model. They were able to see, and that's why I need to cheat, that they were able to go up for 84% of decarbonization potential, up to 96%. So that means there's 12% more decarbonization potential taking hydrogen and hydrogen technologies in the mix. And the good thing about it is that actually the CO2 abatement cost went down from 185 to 88 euros per ton of CO2. So the fact that you include a certain extra flexibility into your overall system is having great results. I find it as a consultant a little bit a pity that it was not a very attractive slide, but from a content point of view, we thought to ourselves, it hits the ground and now takeoff is there.
Okay, I hear a clear sort of call for a new paradigm coming from this panel. Okay, great. There is a surprising question at the bottom. I'm wondering if someone wants to pick it up. It says, are there any tax concerns or barriers you see coming to realize your future vision? Anyone have a point on that?
The biggest question is CO2 tax, CO2 pricing. That's for sure. And of course, there is a concern. I say it clearly. If we continue ETS with exemptions and with 20 euro, it's nothing, it doesn't help. You need a clear tax or pricing of CO2. Call it as you want. It can be tax. And then you will see that a lot of these technologies that we just discussed, and it's not just hydrogen, will be materialized because the incentive will come naturally. Mm-hmm. So this is the biggest question.
So I see preferential tax treatment. Preferential tax treatment for an economist like myself is exactly the same as a subsidy. And I heard Jan say subsidies are not the way to go. Any comments?
I would like us to take the European approach, because I can see that this problem will arise at the border. I can imagine that there are some politicians that said, yeah, but we gave for biomethane some subsidy, so I want it to be burned in my country. It doesn't make sense from a European point of view. So I hope that that issue will be solved.
Mm-hmm. I would maybe like to, because we're talking about CO2 and CO2 prices, we're also been talking all these days about sector coupling. Maybe that's actually a new sectors to be coupled. Huh? Today you have the silos of CO2 under ETS. Mm-hmm. You have CO2 that could be captured under ETS and used into transport to make synthetic fuels. But currently it's still silos and people don't know what to do with the accounting on when you remove it from one sector into another. It's not allowed yet. So maybe also DG Energie and DG Klima could work on something like that to break those existing silos.
That's a great. We started this session with the challenge from the Commission to the industry, and now the panel is challenging the Commission again. Henrik, do you want to comment?
I sort of saw that coming. No, but indeed, but I think that the way it works with the ETS system today, it actually also helps with the decarbonization and the renewable energies. It is an incentive for the large suppliers, producers of energy, to also invest more in renewable energy. And we are even through the ETS system financing several pilots through the Innovation Fund to further put more efficient renewables to the market. So it is combined. It's a coherent policy. Also, let me just comment on this with the EU energy tax system. I've been in the Commission for 16 years, and I've never heard about an EU energy tax system yet. This is something which is for the member state. What happens at EU level is that, of course, well, the member states talk together, and when there are sort of big discrepancies between the countries and cross-border effects, well, then these are addressed. But we do not have an EU energy tax system, and I don't think we have it in a foreseeable future either.
An own budget for the Commission raising a CO2 tax. Is this not allowing to move Europe forward?
Yeah. If we could get vote for that,
I also see a question about concrete scenarios for energy demand. Maybe that's something we can put to Irina. You may be coming from the gas industry infrastructure side. Maybe you can comment on how you see these developments in terms of changing demand from energy, from industry to renewable gas demand. Any comments on that?
Yeah, my comment would be in compatibility with what we have heard before already on gas infrastructure. We believe that there is a role of gas in future and for existing gas infrastructure to deliver decarbonization targets.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Clear. Okay, and then I think we are very close to the last question. There is a reference to the spectacular Greta Thunberg there on screen. Are we doing? Maybe I can rephrase the question and saying, what should we do to give an answer to the call from the young people in the streets calling for climate action?
I would just say it's very simple, actually, and it's not my words. But you look at the UK Climate Change Committee, which is really very influential in driving the policy positions. They said about 2 weeks ago, CCS is a necessity, not an option, if we are to meet our targets in 2050. In the long-term strategy of the European Commission, CCS is there in the scenarios. The reality is that whatever you think or feel about CCS, you have to do it. If we don't do it, we will not get to our 1.5 target. It's that simple. So what we would say to Greta is, you may not like that, but that's the reality. We need to be pragmatic. And we have to be pragmatic and not ideological if we are to actually deliver. And so for me, it's absolutely clear. I look at those reports and I say, they know what they're talking about. The European Commission, the UK Climate Change Committee, you cannot do this without CCS. So we better get on with it.
We will not meet the 450 ppm CO2 in the environment. We will overshoot it. That's sure, we will go higher. And we need to go down again. And how to go down? It's by getting the CO2 out of the air. And you can then either get chopping down forests again and burying the wood somewhere underground and hoping it gets cold one day, or it stays there, or you can just capture the CO2 either from the air or from industry or from combustion, wherever you want, the most efficient way. But we will pass to 450. A lot of people say this. Arias Cañete said we will not achieve this, and we need CCS to capture it to go down again. And the truth is about not will we get there, but the truth is how to reduce it afterwards. And fast.
Jürgen?
I personally like very much what Greta and Fridays for Future initiated. It's to start rethinking things. And Greta is very pragmatic. You might have heard that she asked for nuclear solutions also. Well, you might have heard that. She might have withdrawn that. But she's very pragmatic. And that is why we have to distinguish between onshore and offshore storage. It's very, very important. Because this debate takes place. So even in Fridays for Future. So onshore, it is a no-go for them. Offshore is different. Offshore storage, so the Magnum project that you just mentioned, it's offshore storage. I think 2 megatons already were stored successfully, so it's a proven technology. And my point is, it is a transition technology. That's very, very important, I think, to say. It's not something here to stay forever. But we need it now in order to accelerate the processes. That is what Fridays for Future wants. Start now, decarbonize now, abate CO2 now. And this is not happening enough. We saw the figures, and especially in Europe, we really don't proceed. And that is why every technology, I say it again, every technology is needed, and CCS offshore is a technology that can help enormously and fast.
I've got to pick you up. I know that you actually agree with this anyway. It's not just offshore, it can be onshore because we have pyrolysis. And pyrolysis is where you turn the CO2 into a solid, carbon black, which you can store underground. It's entirely inert. Pyrolysis is existing in industrial applications today. And when you have countries like Germany, which are against the idea of storing liquid or gaseous CO2 underneath them, I understand your point, you can actually do it with solid because it presents no danger. Of course, it's not as far as advanced as steam methane reformation, but it is a technology. When you speak to countries in Southern Europe and they say, we've got nowhere to store CO2 underground, you say, well, no, actually, you do, because you can actually turn it through pyrolysis into a solid. And so I would say that you can do onshore, and you can do offshore, and we need them all. And therefore, I would say that that is how we have to think. It's the and. And we must be pragmatic about that.
Back to system integration.
Thank you.
It breaks my heart.
I'll tell you later.
It breaks my heart, but we have run out of time, so we have to end it here. I'm sorry. I think we could continue for another couple of hours without any problem, but that's all the time we have time for. Let me again thank the European Commission for having us as an organizer. Let me again thank Energy Technologies Europe for working together in a very constructive way to put this event together with AIB. Let me again remind you that if you want to stay in contact, you fill in the paper that was passed around, and please return it back here before, here at the stage. And finally, let me ask you to join me in an applause for such an amazing panel and such an amazing session. Thank you. And of course, thanks to you all for your attention and your questions, and have a nice day. Thanks.